The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 10th chapter. A disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher, and the slave like the master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground unperceived by your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I also will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I also will deny before my Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. The Gospel of the Lord.
Fear. Is there any more pervasive or powerful motivating force in all human experience? Most fears are not automatic or innate. Instead, they are learned or developed. Fears can be influenced by our environment, by our culture, and our individual upbringing. From the moment that we are born, we learn to fear the world around us, certainly to fear the stranger, sometimes to fear even those who are closest to us. Political leaders have long recognized the power of fear in ensuring our conformity, even when doing so does not serve our best interests. Fear is the driving force in our culture behind vast segments of our economy, as well as increasingly our political priorities. Historically, even religion has notoriously used fear to scare people into faith or to manipulate their behavior by holding them by a thread over the fires of hell. Jesus, in today's gospel lesson, recognizes that fear can also cause the failure of following him. Jesus' disciples courageously leave the security of their homes and their families to follow Jesus, but they too will know and ultimately bow before the power of fear. Faithful proclamation, carrying out their gospel mission, will inevitably put disciples on this collision course with the powers of this world. And so as Jesus prepares them for his mission, he is starkly realistic about the threats that they will face. At the same time, he builds a case for why they should not let this fear master them or hinder their witness. Remember, Jesus is on this Get Out the Volunteers campaign like no other. And as we learned in last week's gospel lesson, the disciples are granted this remarkable power to heal, to exorcise demons, to cleanse lepers, even to raise the dead. But he also denies them money and pay and extra clothes, a staff for protection, even sandals. They are to undertake their mission in complete vulnerability and dependence on God, even knowing they face arrests and beatings, opposition even from family members, and hatred and persecution. Remember how Jesus said, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Well, why does Jesus highlight the horrors that await the disciples? Because naming aloud the suffering to be endured and its causes is the important first step in freeing them from the tenacious grip of fear. Jesus continues to describe worst-case scenarios wound together with statements of reassurance and repeated calls to resist fear, the most important element of reassurance. lies, as Jesus tells them, in the relationship that he affirms with them. Do not fear is the dominant, recurrent message in today's reading. 3 times Jesus tells them not to be afraid, reminding them that if God cares for the sparrows who have little value, then certainly God will care for them too, implying that they are of far more value to God than little birds. Well, easy to say, huh? Don't be afraid, but we still are. A more acceptable term for fear these days is anxiety. Now, do you know that the number of persons taking anti-anxiety medicines, that during the pandemic, that number increased by 36%? And since then, the anxiety has not subsided, especially now that we are upon another election cycle. And even in this month of Pride, we know there is much to fear of those who would not hesitate to strip gay people and trans persons of their rights. There are global concerns of world powers at odds with each other, and a neglected planet at grist. Those things add grist to the mill of our worries and our concerns. Fear remains. And I admit that short platitudes about God being in control seem abstract and insufficient. God does allow bad things to happen, and they do. We say things like, love always wins. And while as people of faith, we may believe that is the ultimate outcome. In the meantime, hate sure seems to be making a killing these days. We worship God in flesh, and we long for an encounter, an experience of Emmanuel, a tangible sense of assurance that God knows our fears and is making a way, leading the way, and who is the way, alive in us by the power of the Holy Spirit. As a pastor, I've been with folks in plenty of fearful situations. And on many of those occasions, we've turned to the most beloved of Psalms, the 23rd Psalm, a psalm that many of us have memorized. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Well, now notice how the language here is in third person. God is leading. God is out front before us. Now let me jump to the end of the psalm where God moves to a different proximity. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. A shepherd who leads at the beginning of the psalm follows us at the end. And notice too here at the end of the psalm, God is also spoken of in third person language. But in between the beginning of the psalm and its ending is something rather amazing. And it speaks not only of the faith of the psalmist, but of a faith that makes all the difference when it comes to fear. Listen, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, did you hear it? The opening language of the psalm and the closing language of the psalm is in third person. But in this middle section, the language shifts from third person to first person. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. In a beautiful way, Psalm 23 situates fear in the context of a God who is personal, immanent, and with us. At first, God is leading, and later God follows. But when suddenly in the midst of fear, God is in a different proximity to us, where God comes alongside us and next to us and is with us. Now notice the psalm does not pretend that evil and death do not exist. Terrible things happen, and they happen to good people as well as to bad people. Even the paths of righteousness lead through this valley of the shadow. Death lies ahead for all of us, saints and sinners alike, and for all the ones we love. The psalmist doesn't try to explain evil, nor does he try to minimize evil. He simply says he will not fear it. For all the power that evil has, it doesn't have the power to make him afraid. And why? Why does the psalmist suddenly stop speaking about God in third person? Well, because you don't speak that way when the person is right there with you. Suddenly he speaks to God instead of about God, and he speaks to God as you. I will fear no evil, he says, for you are with me. That is the center of faith, centered in relationship with this intimate God. That is where faith comes from, in the God who is present, in the God who is spoken of as you. Well, this reorientation is so very important because it implies that God is never closer to us than when we are anxious, when we are worried, when we are fearful. God is right there with us. It is in the context of that relationship that even if we can't eradicate the feeling of being afraid, we can certainly temper it with the awareness of and take great comfort in knowing we are never alone. The song You'll Never Walk Alone began life on Broadway as part of the Rodgers and Hammerstein show Carousel, which was premiered in 1945. And in the musical, after Billy's suicide, Nettie comforts the distraught Julie with words of hope. Well, the song was an instant hit, perhaps because the song's message of triumph in fearful times of adversity spoke to the wartime crowds of April 1945. Less than a month before the end of World War II. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. Could it be that one of the reasons that we gather here in this place is to help one another cope with the pervading fear and anxiety that is in our culture today, simply part of the human spirit? As we endure what will likely be an increasingly divided public space and an eroding social fabric, fear will surely be a force to be reckoned with. We will be tempted to fight, to flee, or disengage altogether. But the God who raised Jesus from the dead calls us to a deeper engagement and conquering of fear by embracing the idea that God is never closer to us than when we are afraid. And that one of the ways we experience the closeness of this personal God is in the flesh and blood nearness of our own sisters, brothers, and siblings. For Jesus said, where 2 or 3 gather, there am I in the midst of them. You help me to see that God is present alongside, close and personal. And I help you, especially when we are anxious or afraid. And it is precisely in this valley of death, this liminal space of contradiction, cognitive dissonance, dim mirrors, and our sometimes inability to see one another as God intends, that we can begin to understand the words of the psalmist, you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Amen.